Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, taking stock of the Wolves' playoff run to the conference finals, why no drastic changes are needed, and a couple notes based on how the Wolves flamed out. We'll talk about Rudy. We'll talk about Ant. What does this loss to the Mavs tell us about next steps in the offseason for the Wolves? We'll break it all down. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Happy Monday, everybody. And the dust has settled following the end of the Wolves season on Thursday night. We've all had the weekend to kind of decompress from this, exit interviews, et cetera. All that stuff's out there. And today I want to do kind of like one final, tie a bow on the playoffs overall. What the playoffs have told us about a couple of key players, Ant and Rudy specifically. And then I also want to talk about why Tim Conley had an interesting quote about kind of next steps for this Wolves team. And I want to underscore what he said. And we'll start there with why drastic changes are certainly not needed and probably won't happen to this roster before the fall and why that's a good thing. The rest of the week, we'll talk about later, what I want to get to, player reviews, stuff like that. We'll, of course, sift through the cap situation. We'll get into draft coverage probably a week to 10 days out from that because we want to, kind of take stock of where we're at post-season for the guys that are on the roster. So lots to get to. First of all, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X. That's at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. Let's start here. Everyone knows that the Timberwolves are going to have a cap crunch this offseason, and I do want to get into that. I do want to get into the weeds on it. It's important that, there's an understanding moving forward this summer on the show of what the cap situation is, right? What does the second apron mean? Where are the Wolves? We'll maybe touch on that a little today. So, the thing that's already out there from a national perspective, and we will get to like some of the cat trade ideas and some of that stuff because it's out there already, like immediately following the game Thursday night. Like Zach Lowe talked about cat trades on his podcast. I believe Bill Simmons did on his show. Like there's lots of that stuff out there and it may happen and we will talk about it. But I don't want to start there because I think it's disingenuous isn't the right word. I just don't think it's the right place to start. This team just had the best season in 20 years for a Wolves team and arguably the best season of all time, for a Wolves team. Granted, the 2004 team had Kevin Garnett, a Hall of Famer and league MVP on it. So I hesitate to call it the best season ever for them. But I know factually, win-wise, and how dominant the defense was, you could have that argument, sure. The point is, I don't want to diminish that. And I also think it's important to realize that like any cat trade that is talked about isn't because the Wolves have to trade cat or need to trade cat because cat wasn't good enough or because of the way the playoff run ended. And I don't think that's true either. I don't think that's the right analysis here. I think we should start with this quote from Tim Conley. And here's why. Here's a quote. Conley said, and this was as part of the Jerry Zgoda article over at the Star Tribune. Conley said, when you're a home court team and a Final Four team, all those teams can win a championship, Conley said. So I don't know if there's any linear path to that next step. I don't think there is one singular answer. A lot of it is matchups and health. Okay. So what is he really saying? Reading between the lines, Tim Conley is basically saying, well, first of all, the part that's really obvious, he's right. If you're a top 4 team in the conference and you get home court and you advance to the conference finals, any one of those 4 teams could have won the title. Like, by definition, you're one of the best 4 teams in the league, and a couple bounces, one direction or the other, and you're sitting there in the finals, and then anything can happen over the course of a 7-game series against another really good team. So that's true, 100% true. No lies detected there. The other thing he's kind of saying, if you're reading between the lines, is there's a lot of luck involved. And we, basically, if we're going to diminish team building to this is 100% true also. It's building the team that has the widest possible path to being one of those Final Four teams and ultimately a finals team, and the goal, of course, being a championship team. But to find a wide path, to give yourself some latitude to succeed. Now, the Western Conference is going to be a more narrow path because of how stocked it is. And people said that when the Wolves traded for Rudy Gobert. It's like, oh, what's the point? Like, why are they going to try and be a 48 win 5-6 seed in the Western Conference? Well, turns out they won 56 games, were the 3 seed, and easily could have been the 1 seed and got to the conference finals. To keep that path as wide as possible, to jam, a 2x4 in the window that is this title window that the Wolves have now opened, and keep it open for as long as possible, is the next goal. Realistically, are the Wolves going to be able to make a change to this roster that dramatically improves their chances of winning the title? No. When you're a conference finals team, there really isn't. That's not a thing. The Celtics last year taking a swing for last offseason for Jrue Holiday, that's maybe the closest example. And there certainly is. Could you trade Karl-Anthony Towns? Could you shuffle some pieces and the overall talent level stays similar, but you're kind of just balancing where the talent fits on the roster? Like, you're spreading it out a little so you don't have so much tied up into 3 bigs. Sure, you could do that. Will it definitively make this team better and give them a better chance at a title this year, or a better chance for longer? That's the question. And that's where I think that's what this offseason is all about. Is there a chance that one of those trades presents itself where the Wolves could trade Cat, make themselves better, and everybody says, all right, the Wolves are better positioned? It's technically possible. Is it likely? No. I would say definitively it's unlikely. The odds are not good that the Wolves could trade. And all you got to do, I mentioned the Zach Lowe podcast earlier, like him and Kevin Pelton from ESPN would go through like basically every team. Is there a trade out there? And there really isn't, because of the contract, situation for Cat, because of the Wolves complications contract-wise, and because Cat's really good. Cat's a top 25 player, whether you like him or not. He's a top 25 player in the league. It's going to be hard to trade him and get requisite value back and not be in the exact same cap situation you're in now, but now you're just kind of resetting these guys, trying to familiarize themselves with each other and resetting what the coaching staff has worked on for the last 2 years since the Gobert trade. So what's the risk and reward there? Is the reward really that much greater? No team goes into the season saying we are a finals team, because you just don't know. Health, matchups, so many other factors can crop up. For this team to go into next year saying that they're definitively better than this year's team is a really challenging thing to do. Some would say impossible. So what Tim Conley is saying is, look, let's run it back. Let's do the same thing we did this year. Hope and pray for similar, if not even better health, which would be hard. I know Cat missed several weeks, but that was really kind of it, other than some nicks and bruises along the way. Hope for the same or better health, and hope for a better draw in the playoffs. I mean, going through, Phoenix ended up not being a challenge, but the matchup looked like it would be challenging. Going through the defending champs in a 7-game series, and then facing Luka Doncic, a top 3, maybe 2 player in the world, who's the most difficult single-player matchup for this team's defense. That's a tough road, and they almost did it. So drastic changes are not needed to this team, because unless you can say definitively we're trading Cat and we're better off, on the floor the team will be better this year, and the salary position is not worse for the upcoming years, what's the point? Why are we shuffling deck chairs? Titanic's maybe not a good analysis because this team is ascending and not plummeting, hopefully. But You know what I mean? Like, why are we reshuffling the deck of cards? Maybe is better. I think I mixed up my shuffling and my decks analogies there. Why reshuffle the deck of cards? All-star out. You better be bringing an all-star in, but is it actually making you better? Why rock the boat when you're already a conference finals team? Now, there are financial implications, which we have plenty of time to talk about, but it is possible for the Wolves to enter next year without rocking said boat, without trading Cat, without trading Nas, while exploring a Rudy extension, because he's going to be up. He is eligible for an extension and will surely be bringing that up to the Wolves front office. There is a path here to keep this team intact. And we'll get way in depth on some of this stuff, even starting this week, but over the next several weeks. I do want to talk about some specific players related to this postseason and what the playoffs told us about the roster as currently constructed. We'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion with a B professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing a ton of hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so what did this playoff run tell us about this Timberwolves team? And I already kind of covered the first point in the first segment, which the linear path that Conley discussed in his quote. And I would sum it up by saying this: we're right there, folks. This is a Final Four team that, that Nas 3 rattles in at the buzzer in game 2, or they hang on in game 1, and like this thing's going at least 6 or 7, and there isn't a sky is falling, and that's aggressive. Nobody's saying that, right? There isn't as much of a pall cast over the end of the season for the Wolves. This team is right there. Stay the course. Related to that, Anthony Edwards can be that guy. Yes, he had a poor series against Dallas for the most part. He, a couple of those box score lines were fine, although I think they kind of belied the actual quality of Ant's play late in the series. But, the first couple of games, he looked tired. He looked worn out. He looked gassed is what we keep saying, right? He did. And it's not great. He's 22. That's when you need to put the pedal to the metal and propel your team to victory. We saw him do that in the Denver series. We saw him be outstanding for the most part in the Phoenix series. I think he had 3 or 4 games that were just really good, if I remember correctly, and made the right reads constantly when teams were loading up on him, trapping him, putting 2 on the ball consistently, no matter where he was on the floor. We saw him play through all of it, and we saw it catch up to him a little bit. I mean, he played in, what did he play in, 80 games this regular season? I have it right here. 79 games, 79 of 82 regular season games. Don't be shocked if the Wolves make him take a couple more games off next year, because of, and now we're leading into the Olympics too. He's going to play for Team USA, which hopefully the benefits of being around that quality of players and coaching staff and competition, and the juice that international competition should give him will outweigh the wear and tear. Maybe he's still just at the right age where the experience and all of the above, the aforementioned stuff will build into him and just make him better. Maybe that's the case. But all that to say, next year, it was just more, I think, a combination of quality of play and running into just a guy who's one of the best players in the world in Luka Doncic. And Ant, we could argue he's a top 10 player in the league now. I'd probably say he's in the 10 to 12-ish range. We'll talk about this more in the offseason. But Luka is otherworldly. Like, Luka is not only incredible, but playing at an incredible level. And it was okay for stretches, but he just needed to be great. And there's plenty of, just go back to Luka a couple of years ago, his challenges in the conference finals as a 23-year-old, and recognize how much better he is now than he was then. And we can see that there are other levels here, several more levels for Ant to go, but he can be that guy. We saw him be that guy throughout the first 2 rounds of the playoffs with regularity. So there's only confidence there. It's not his fault that we got out over our skis a little bit collectively as a basketball universe related to what his ceiling, and frankly, his ceiling still is. The sky still is the limit, but he's still a 22-year-old getting past the first round of the playoffs for the first time. The other thing that I'll touch on now is Rudy Gobert can play in the playoffs and not be played off the floor. Don't listen to, Kendrick Perkins or whoever else. I know Perkins liked the Wolves for most of the year, but then said he was embarrassed he voted for Rudy Gobert for Defensive Player of the Year. In fact, for a more nuanced take, I never thought I'd say this, but Ryan Russillo's podcast had Austin Rivers on, of course, former teammate of basically everybody on the Wolves, to talk about Rudy's impact and why guys don't think much of Rudy across the NBA. But Rudy was never played off the floor in the playoffs. We could talk about whether or not the Wolves should have had him switched on to Luka guarding on the perimeter, but Rivers even points out on that podcast, I think it was actually before Game 5, so I think it posted on maybe early on Thursday last week, or during the day Thursday last week. Rivers even said, like, hey, Rudy played that Luka game winner in Game 2, I think it was, really well. He took away him going left. Luka had to counter 3 times before he got that shot off. Should the Wolves have put Rudy in that spot? Yeah, probably not. But the Wolves in all season being okay with Gobert isolated on the perimeter defensively because he can more than hold his own, especially for a 7-2 guy. But he was never played off the floor in the playoffs. He was outstanding in the Phoenix series. He was very good in the Denver series, unless he was guarding Jokic one-on-one, but nobody can guard Jokic one-on-one. He still had that impact where Jamal Murray was petrified to shoot the ball within 12 feet of the basket. Kyrie Irving had a couple of really rough performances. I shouldn't say really rough. A couple of more difficult performances against the Wolves in the conference finals because of Gobert's presence. Gobert was never played off the floor. The Wolves put him in some tough situations. And no, he's not going to be any quicker next year. Granted, year 1 to year 2, Rudy improved in Minnesota because of the injuries and the wear and tear in year 1. He was in better shape this year. I don't know that he's ever going to be faster than he is now. He's only getting older on the wrong side of 30, right? He's not going to be fleeter of foot next season. So the Wolves will have to consider that here moving forward. But in case anyone was wondering, Rudy Gobert was not played off the floor in the playoffs. To the contrary, he was a huge part of them getting to the conference finals and making a push to get to the finals overall this year. So not that I was ever concerned about it. I spent quite a bit of time debunking the Rudy played off the floor theory about, what's his name in the Clippers and the quarter 3 barrage. Like, that wasn't ever Rudy's fault. It was the Utah Jazz roster construction, to a lesser extent, the coaching staff's fault. Rudy was really good this year. Really, really good. He deserved the Defensive Player of the Year award, and he will be a big part of this team next year. All right. I want to talk about one other aspect related to actually shooting, specifically for the Wolves, as we move into the offseason, and then kind of set the stage for what we'll do the rest of this week. And, some of the stuff I mentioned before about what's upcoming for the Wolves. So we'll do all that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Let's talk a little bit about shooting. The Timberwolves this year finished the regular season number 3 in three-point shooting percentage as a team. They actually shot the ball extremely well this year. And so I recognize that when I say that I want to talk about the Timberwolves' lack of shooting. So Mike Conley shot a career high 44%, one of the best marks in the entire league this season, 44.2%. Monte Morris in limited run with the Wolves was 42%. Cat was 41.6% over 62 games, which is right in line with, his career average is 39.8%. That was the best he shot since the 17-18 season, but he's been between the 40 and 41-ish percent mark several times. So Cat did what you'd expect. Nas was 41%, which was a really nice bump. It's not necessarily what I don't think anyone expected him to shoot that well. It was one of the reasons I was a little cautious about them extending him, is he'd never shot better than 35% from deep. Well, he was 41% this year from outside the arc. Nickeil Alexander-Walker's 39% was, I believe, a career high for him too. I'm going to see if I can pull it up real quick. Nickeil was, 39.1% was a career high for him. Last year, he ended up shooting 38% though from the field, from 3-point range. So it wasn't up that much, but it was, better than expected. And then Anthony Edwards was again more of a volume 3-point shooter. Was 35.7%. Last year was 36.9%. For his career, he's now a shade over 35%. So while the 3-point rate actually went down slightly, we saw that he, is going to continue to take threes. He's going to continue to take deep threes in transition off the dribble, and he's capable of making them. Now, while the 3-point rate went down, it was actually the lowest mark of his career. He attacked more, and we saw the mid-range attempts go down a little bit as well. So it was more that he was getting into the paint and scoring, which was good to see. I say the mid-range attempts went down. The long mid-range attempts were a palatable mark. He shot more mid-range and short mid-range, which is fine because that meant he was getting to the free throw line and deeper and shooting these, some of those bank shots, stuff like that. That could be massaged, that could be tweaked a little bit. But all that to say, he was one of their higher volume 3-point guys, and it was a league average shot. The problem was in the playoffs when teams were loading up on Ant, they would run these lineups out. If you had Kyle Anderson and Rudy on the floor at the same time and the ball was in Ant's hands, that means that 2 of the 4 options for him to pass the ball to are not 3-point shooters. And that was hard. And then you layer in Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Jaden McDaniels losing confidence and effectiveness at stretches, especially Alexander-Walker, late in the Denver series and throughout the Dallas series. Then where do you turn? Adding Troy Brown Jr. and Shake Milton was supposed to help with that. Both were traded at the deadline in the Monte Morris deal. We also saw Jordan McLaughlin when he saw minutes this year, which wasn't often. He shot threes well. So, it's not an obvious problem, but you can never have too much shooting. That's one of the old sayings, right? And it's true. Because if Ant has the ball in his hands, and of your other, call it 8 or 9 rotation guys, you have 2 complete non-shooters in Rudy and Kyle Anderson. That can be a problem, especially when they're 2 of your top 7 in the playoffs. And then 2 of your other guys in Alexander Walker and McDaniels are ineffective. You need to have more options to turn to, and the Wolves just didn't have anyone else on the bench. They didn't have a Troy Brown option at that point. Monte Morris didn't have the size to put out there at that point. So, all that to say, Kyle Anderson is going to move on. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent. It's highly unlikely the Wolves would bring him back. He's going to get more money than they can afford. And as much as the Wolves and Chris Finch love Kyle Anderson, I think you can replicate, and we'll talk more about this later, replicate a lot of what Slow-Mo does in some other ways. So I think replacing him with a shooter in the rotation will do wonders, is maybe strong, but would help in a playoff situation like this, where you just need a little bit more spacing, a little bit more effective and confident 3-point shooting. So that's something to look for here this offseason in what the Wolves are looking to find. So again, these playoffs reiterated that Ant can be the guy. The development is coming. The stamina should continue to improve. He should continue to get better in these areas. Rudy was not played off the floor in the playoffs. The Wolves could maybe be a bit more judicious, and when he's left on an island on the perimeter, mix in some additional coverages, be a little bit more flexible with their coverages. But Rudy was great overall this year and was not played off the floor. And then finally, the The Wolves are a very good shooting team, but they need one more rotation shooter. They need one more option to go to when times get tough and the offense isn't flowing and Ant is being loaded up on, which again is maybe less of a problem in the regular season or against certain teams, but it becomes an issue against talented and well-coached, well-coordinated defenses. Okay. What we're going to do here next, this offseason, I do want to do player reviews. And if you have been around in past offseasons, what I'll do is I'll spend anywhere from a segment to a full show on a player review. We'll talk through a player's season relative to expectations, what the contract situation is, what their role would be on the Wolves the following year. So we'll go through the whole roster. Like we'll talk two-way guys. Like I'll do a show. Actually, we may even get to this on Tuesday. We'll do shows here this week where we'll talk about like Wendell Moore and TJ Warren and Luka Garza and guys like that. But I won't spend more than a segment on each of them. We'll get into rotation guys, and we may do a half show on, I don't know. Nas is probably a half show. Monte Morris is probably a segment to a half show. And then we'll do full shows on guys like Kat, Ant, Rudy. Again, relative to expectations for this year, what to expect for them next year, offseason potential moves with each of them, etc. We'll then we'll talk some cap stuff. In fact, I may actually start with that Tuesday as we get into the roster to kind of set the stage for like what is likely to happen this offseason and why related to the cap space, or I should say lack thereof. There is no cap space, the negative cap space the Wolves have. And then eventually we'll get into some NBA draft talk. We'll talk about, the Wolves actually do have a first-round pick this year, which may be hard to believe given how many they traded, but they have one. It's a weak draft. They've also got a high second-round pick. We'll talk about possibilities for the draft for Minnesota, names to watch. And then we'll get into like which guys on the roster. Jalen Clark, who's never suited up, last year's second-round pick, torn Achilles. Could he be an impact player this year? Impact's maybe strong. Could be a rotation guy, Leonard Miller, Josh Minott. We'll talk about all those guys as part of the player review series. We'll get into the free agency talk. We'll talk potential cat trades just because we have to. I think we have to acknowledge that it is a possibility. Despite how I set the show up today, I think it's unlikely. It's a possibility he's traded. And there certainly are conversations out there being had on national shows in the rumor mill here that we'll discuss. So we'll do all that here in the coming weeks. The draft is 3 weeks from Thursday, I believe. Like we're just over 3 weeks from the draft, and then free agency starts the week after that. And then Summer League. Like it's all fast and furious. And with the Wolves playing all the way throughout May, we're going to cram all the offseason stuff that usually takes us an extra 2 or 3 weeks. It'll get condensed here. And a reminder, we are still daily throughout the months of June and July. And August, we'll go to 3 shows a week, but we're daily basically through free agency and Summer League and all that good stuff. So lots to get to and lots to cover over the next several weeks. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Once again, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on the biggest stories. I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.